Money Vikings investors, thanks for joining me today. I have a very important one for you. For all you real estate investors out there, what are the best places to invest for climate change? And what questions do we need to be asking ourselves as real estate investors as climate change continues to impact various regions? So we're going to get into all that today and go into some detail. So thanks again. Please consider liking and subscribing to Money Vikings, and also check out truewealth.moneyvikings.com. Feel free to join our newsletter subscription, and please share our channel as we grow our content. And again, it's all things investing, wealth building, health, collectibles, and more to create a life of true wealth. So with that, let's get right into it. So best places to invest for climate change. Real estate investors need to beware. Where you invest is becoming more and more critical as climate change related issues begin to grow exponentially. Some climate resilient regions may produce better investment returns, in fact. This is all part of our Raging 20s climate resilience coverage that we're doing here. So Raging 20s is something that we coined a couple years ago. It's a time of geopolitical change. It's a time of black swan events like pandemics. It's a time of great social change, and it's a time of great technological change. So all this is coming at us rapidly, and it's creating what we're calling the Raging 20s. This is not meant to be doom and gloom, but meant to take a clear-eyed, evidence-based look at reality to become stronger people and better investors. So let's examine the best places for climate change from a perspective of a real estate investor. So loss is real. I've known several real estate investors that have lost properties due to fire and other natural disasters intensified by a warming global climate. You may think, who cares? That's what insurance is for. Well, the insurance process for these folks was a nightmare, and increasingly insurance companies are pulling out of high-risk environments. So it's definitely something that has to be on your radar as a real estate investor. So real estate is a tangible, hard asset. That's why we're talking about this in the context of physical threats to infrastructure. Many real estate investors love this aspect of real estate, me included. It is a different experience compared to watching candles and lines on a stock trading software or swiping left and right in an investment account. The physicality of it is both an asset and a liability. It cannot disappear when the economy malfunctions or through some kind of flash crash. You still have that physical piece of property no matter what's going on. But on the other hand, it can be destroyed by weather phenomenon, fire, arson, etc. It's definitely at risk of all those things. And those risks are going up over the years. Now let's get this straight. Let's be clear. Every region will feel impacts. There is no 100% safe place. There's no place that appears completely immune from the impacts of climate change and climate resilient regions. From the research I've seen, it can be a kind of pick your poison moment. You might escape wildfire in one area, but face severe water shortages in another. You may miss out on sea level rise in one area, but then you're going to have to deal with a month of smoke-filled air from massive wildfires literally 1,000 miles away. There's nowhere to hide from the effects of climate change. Every region in the United States has felt the rising temperatures, and in certain areas, flooding and more extreme weather patterns are putting real estate investors at risk. Experts even predict that some areas of the world will be unlivable by 2050, especially some of those in Africa and the Middle East. While some U.S. cities are better prepared to weather climate change and more extreme weather patterns, some areas are more exposed due to proximity to flood zones, a lack of climate-adept infrastructure, and the population's level of preparedness. So on our website, if you check out truewealth.moneyvikings.com, we do have some interesting charts here. There is actually a silver lining and some good news for North America. So if you look at from a macro world standpoint, North America and Canada is actually pretty well positioned to be somewhat resilient to the worst impacts of climate change. Not all. We'll definitely feel it. But there are areas of the world that unfortunately are going to feel much worse impacts, specifically large swaths of Africa, the Middle East, India, some parts of Asia, etc., are going to have really hard impacts from climate change. Now, unfortunately, this is going to affect all of us. It has to. It's a global economy, connected economy, and so there's going to be disruptions. And again, that's what we talk about the raging 20s. And again, not to be doom and gloom, but to be prepared, to think about it, to see it coming, and to manage your risk. So much of investing is managing risk. So that said, trouble spots in the U.S. There are parts of the U.S. that are dealing with extreme heat, flooding, sea level rise, stronger hurricanes, fires, smoke, and more, and that's to continue. The 2023 fires in Canada blew toxic smoke into the upper Midwest and eastern coast of the U.S., making air quality hazardous for weeks on end. My main point is no area is immune. But one strategy we can talk about up front is perhaps for real estate investors, we can avoid the riskiest areas. So unfortunately, a lot of areas of Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, New Jersey, Virginia, and Texas are particularly vulnerable. Hey, I love all those places, great places. I've visited many of them, but unfortunately, they are not as positioned well geographically for the worst impacts of climate change. This does not guarantee success. And again, I'll go back to that example of the wildfires in Canada. They blew a lot of toxic smoke into areas that are considered more resilient. So it's a little bit of a whack-a-mole, pick your poison type of thing. So what to do as a real estate investor? So I would say number one, the first thing is to do your homework. Before investing in a specific area, do research on the near-term and long-term risk factors. Think about your specific time horizon. If you're making a multi-generational investment, you may want to reconsider a particular area that is projected to deal with future shocks. Does the area have a climate action plan or some ways to mitigate the effects? A lot of cities have very good climate action plans. And if they have one that makes a lot of sense and they're actually investing in it, it could very much be a great place to invest your real estate dollars. Number two, factor the risk into your investment decision. So investing is always an exercise in risk management. A whole host of things can change and wipe out an investment. We all know that as seasoned investors. And those who have been investing for a while know that black swan events also happen. This is one reason I'm a huge advocate for strategically and uncorrelated investment diversification. So again, factor that in. If this is a major risk factor, perhaps you're going to pay less for that investment in order to take advantage of that return and take on that additional risk. So the third thing I would do that I'm doing is consider diversified real estate investment trusts. So most individual real estate investors cannot properly diversify with physical hard real estate, but large REITs certainly can, and we can all own shares of those. So a couple examples is this. Public Storage may get one site wiped out from a wildfire, but they have 5,000 other income producing locations. So the whole company is going to be fine. They can absorb that kind of risk. American Tower or Crown Castle may lose a few towers here and there, but they'll have thousands of others that produce income. So it's just an example of how you can still invest in real estate, but then manage this risk long term. So here it is, regions that are geographically appear to be best positioned for climate change. The first one is the Great Lakes region. The Great Lakes are a major source of fresh water, which will be increasingly important as climate change leads to water shortages in other parts of the country. And the region is relatively well protected from sea level rise. So there's an area to consider. The second one I'd like to mention is the Midwest. The Midwest is home to a number of agriculturally productive areas, which will be important as climate change leads to changes in agricultural yields. The region is also relatively well protected from extreme weather events such as hurricanes and wildfires. Number three, the Northeast. The Northeast is home to a number of major cities which have the resources and infrastructure to adapt to climate change. Adaptability is going to be key, and that's why I say look at your particular city's climate action plan. Do they have a plan, and are they putting in place the infrastructure and the investments now to be resilient in the future? If so, it's probably a fine place to invest. Number four is the Rocky Mountain region. The Rocky Mountains provide a natural barrier to many of the extreme weather events that are becoming more common due to climate change. And the region is also home to a number of renewable energy resources such as solar, wind power, which helps to reduce its reliance on fossil fuels. And the fifth one is the Pacific Northwest. The Pacific Northwest is home to a number of temperate rainforests, which will provide a valuable refuge from the heat and drought that are becoming more common in other parts of the country. The region is also home to a number of renewable energy resources such as hydroelectric power and wind power. The Pacific Northwest has a relatively high level of education and income, which will help to adapt to the changes caused by climate change. So those are just 5 to consider. City by city level, best places for climate change. We're clearly not going to stop climate change. Hopefully some technology will be developed that will help mitigate the worst impacts. But as an investor on a city by city level, I would research again whether a particular city has a strong climate resiliency plan, because there are cities outside of these regions that are planning and prepared, and they'll probably just fine. As I said, North America is not going to be the worst impacted in the world. It's all relative when you're talking about these types of changes. So with that, I would love to hear your thoughts on how you're thinking about this as a real estate investor. How are you mitigating for this risk or taking it into consideration and factoring things into your investing decisions? Thanks a lot for watching, and see y'all on the next one. Take care.